In the late 1970s, many young girls started disappearing in Peru. At first, no one really paid much attention because most of the girls were either street kids or from indigenous tribes. But then one day, some Ayachocos people witnessed a 9-year-old girl almost getting snatched up by a guy named Pedro Lopez. Instead of calling the cops on Lopez, the tribe members decided to take matters into their own hands. They beat him up, stripped him down, and started burying him alive. It was like they wanted him to suffer a slow, painful death. Luckily, an American missionary showed up and convinced them to hand Lopez over to the police before things got even more out of hand. Local authorities failed to take Pedro Lopez into custody. Instead, he was just kicked out of the country. This allowed him to continue abducting girls in other South American countries and, as later discovered, to brutally murder up to 300 children. Welcome to another episode of Crimson Sin with Tamsin Leigh. I am your host, Tamsin Leigh. Full show notes and sources can be found in the description. Don't forget to like and follow for more episodes, and also leave a comment about what case I should cover in my next deep dive. Pedro Lopez was born on October 8, 1948 in Colombia during the height of the country's La Violencia period. The country was ruled by riots and unthinkable acts of violence during this 10-year civil war between the Colombian Conservative Party and the Colombian Liberal Party. The conflict is believed to have begun when liberal politician Jorge Gaitan was assassinated. This war continued from 1948 until 1958 and claimed over 200,000 lives before it was over. The conflict continued to have a lasting impact even after the fighting slowed, affecting all areas of society, including the economy. As all of this was unfolding, Pedro was born. His father died 6 months before he was born, and his mother was a penniless prostitute. He was also the 7th born of 13 children. His mother was described as an overbearing woman dominating her children with an ironclad fist. With a number of clients coming and going, Pedro would witness his mother being abused. Despite growing up in a domineering, poverty-stricken household during a period of chaos, he was known to be a very kind boy who dreamt of becoming a teacher. Even though his home life was anything but joyous, it was better than growing up on the streets, where the country's crime rate was 50 times higher than all other countries in the world at that time. However, Pedro would find himself living on the streets. The reason for the 8-year-old leaving the family home has varying accounts. Some accounts claim that Pedro was kicked out after his mother caught him fondling one of his sisters, while others state that he simply ran away. Pedro eventually found his way to Bogota, Colombia's capital city, where he lived with other homeless children. Here he would join a gang and become involved with drugs. But things started looking up for him when a seemingly kind stranger offered him a place to stay for the night and food. What were the odds? With his young naivety, he quickly accepted the offer and soon found how cruel the older man truly was. Instead of taking the child to a house with the promised food and peaceful sleep, the stranger brought him to an abandoned building where he sodomized him numerous times, before throwing him out onto the harsh, cold streets again, but now terrified of strangers. He would sleep in alleyways and abandoned buildings, only coming out at night to search for food from trash cans and local dumps. After a year, Pedro built up courage to begin traveling again. He spent the first few days begging for food and scavenging dumpsters when an elderly couple approached the 10-year-old boy. The couple was distressed by the boy's skeletal appearance and became heartbroken watching him beg for food. They provided him with a warm meal and asked him to come live with them. Pedro accepted the couple's offer and went home with them. While living with this couple, they provided him with free room and board and eventually enrolled him in a day school for orphans. Unfortunately, his chances at a better life seemed to be destroyed once again. In 1963, at the age of 12, a male teacher molested him at his day school. This rekindled Pedro's previous fears, and anger grew within him. Not long after the incident, he stole money from an office in the school and quickly ran away from home. He spent the next 6 years of his life begging for food and committing petty thefts in order to survive. When he was in the middle of his teen years, Pedro began stealing cars to support himself. Local chop shops paid him very well for his services. Even though he had minimal education and lacked certain skills, he was very proficient in stealing cars. But even though he was good at stealing cars, he would still be arrested in 1969. At 18 years old, Pedro was sentenced to serve 7 years in prison. After serving only 2 days of his sentence, he found himself being brutally gang raped by 4 older inmates. Following this incident, he swore to himself that no one would ever touch him again. This is when he started fashioning a knife constructed from prison utensils and spending the following 2 weeks obtaining revenge by individually murdering each of the 4 men that had raped him. Authorities deemed the murders self-defense and would only add 2 more years to Pedro's initial sentence for car theft. With Pedro experiencing all of these hardships coupled with prison time, it did irreparable damage to his mind and appears to have pushed him further over the edge. Due to mental abuse he endured at the hands of his mother, in his early years, he had grown a hatred for women. To him, his mother was to blame for all of his life suffering and heartaches. But this resentment extended to all women. He found communicating with women to be unfeasible and would develop an addiction to pornographic books and magazines. After his release from prison in 1978, Pedro traveled throughout Peru with a newly acquired taste for blood. Instead of turning his attention toward his mother or women around her age, Pedro claimed to have started stalking and killing at least 100 girls aged between 9 and 12. From the Ayacucho region of Peru, earning him the name Monster of the Andes. He would later explain that he started abducting girls from the nearby indigenous communities, mostly those located in remote areas. He would offer the young children gifts if they came along with him, and noted that he targeted the girls with a certain look of innocence. After luring a victim away, he stated, "I would take her to a secret hideaway where prepared graves waited. I cuddled them and then raped them at sunrise. At the first line of light, I would get excited. I forced the girl into sex and put my hands around her throat. When the sun rose, I would strangle her." He boasted of his delight in watching a certain light go out in his victim's eyes. But his disgusting deeds didn't stop there. Pedro would then continue to violate their lifeless bodies before hiding or burying their corpses. While it is impossible to verify if his claims of murdering 100 girls is true, it is known that his string of murders came to a halt after one incident where a group of Ayacucho's indigenous people caught Pedro attempting to lure a 9-year-old girl away from their community. Pedro stated that the Indians stripped and tortured him, burying him in sand up to his neck and pouring syrup over his head to be eaten by ants. That was until an American missionary intervened and convinced the indigenous people that they should turn Pedro over to the police. They reluctantly agreed. Some accounts state that the American missionary did not turn him over, while others claim the Peruvian government did not want to waste time investigating Indian complaints and just sent him to Ecuador, where he escaped custody. In either case, Pedro was free and continued his violent crimes. Following his return to Ecuador, Pedro began traveling around the region, including frequent stops in Colombia. Authorities started to notice an increase in missing persons involving young girls in the late 1970s and in the 80s, but assumed these disappearances were related to human trafficking or child runaways. Without a body, there wasn't cause for alarm. But this appears to have changed in 1980 when a flash flood in Ambato, Ecuador, revealed the bodies of 4 young girls. Some articles I read stated 1979 as the year the flood unearthed the victims' bodies, but most reports stated 1980. I went with the year I saw the most in my research, so know that there will be an inconsistency there if you look it up. After the flood unearthed the 4 missing girls' bodies, police decided they needed to take a closer look at these cases. It was difficult for investigators to determine the cause of death for the victims, but came to the conclusion that the young girls must have met foul play since someone had buried their bodies. 2 days after the flash flood, Carvina Poveda was shopping at a local marketplace with her 12-year-old daughter, Marie, when an unknown man attempted to abduct her child. Carvina cried for help as the man tried to flee the market with her daughter in his arms. The merchants chased the man down before he could escape with the little girl and held him down until authorities arrived. When police arrived, Pedro was rambling incoherently, and they believed they were dealing with nothing more than a madman. However, the timing of the attempted abduction and the discovery of 4 bodies was suspicious. While at police headquarters, Pedro refused to cooperate with investigators and remained silent throughout the entire questioning. An undercover detective posed as a cellmate in order to gain Pedro's trust. It did not take long for him to begin talking and soon revealed such repulsive acts of violence that the cop could hear no more and asked to be taken out of the cell. Pedro would then confess to authorities that he had murdered at least 110 girls in Ecuador, 100 in Colombia, and many more than 100 in Peru. He told investigators, "I like the girls in Ecuador. They are more gentle and trusting, more innocent. They are not as suspicious of strangers as Colombian girls." During his confessions, he blamed his crimes on his hard life and lonely adolescence. He stated, "I lost my innocence at age 8, so I decided to do the same to as many young girls as I could." When investigators asked how he was able to pull off his self-professed crimes, he explained that he surveyed village markets for his targets with a certain look of innocence. He always searched for his victims in full daylight because he did not want darkness to hide their throes of death from him. Pedro explained that he would first rape his victim, then strangle them as he stared into their eyes. He told investigators he felt deep pleasure and sexual excitement watching their life fade before him. But the nightmare would not stop there. Once the victim was dead, Pedro claimed he would often act out gruesome tea parties with the little girls' bodies, propping them up and talking to them. Authorities were skeptical of their suspect's claims at first. It's hard to believe that someone could be so cruel and morbid. Pedro realized that investigators held a lot of doubt regarding his claims, so he offered to lead them to several spots throughout the country where he buried the girls' bodies. Soon, all doubts about the monster of the Andes diminished when Pedro led them to a secluded area in Ambato where they discovered the remains of 53 girls, aged 8 to 12. He continued to lead investigators to 28 other sites, but no other bodies were found. Some of the detectives believed that animals may have scattered the remains and floods could have washed what little was left. Back at the police station, Pedro was charged with 57 counts of murder, which was then boosted to 110 from his detailed confessions. Pedro claimed to have killed more than 300 girls. However, some experts have suggested that He was exaggerating, and the number of victims is probably closer to 70. Pedro was convicted for the murder of 110 people in 1980 and sentenced to the maximum prison term allowed under Ecuadorian law at the time, which was only 16 years. He was then released 2 years early in 1994 for good behavior and deported back to Colombia, where he was expected to face the firing squad for his crimes committed in the country, but prosecutors were unable to make a case for it. Instead, a judge declared Pedro insane and ordered that he be placed in a psychiatric hospital. In 1998, this hospital declared him to be sane and released him. He was supposed to report to the police each month after that, but he never did. In January 1999, Pedro gave an exclusive, one-time-only interview to the National Examiner where he stated, "I am the man of the century. No one will ever forget me." The interview was very unhinged, speaking of his crimes, and one in which he stated he would resume his violent crimes after his release. In 2002, Interpol issued a new warrant for Pedro Lopez's arrest in connection with a new murder case. However, the last time anyone had seen him in public was in 1999. His whereabouts remain unknown to this day. What did you think of today's case? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like and follow for more recent crime news and deep dive episodes from me. Also, check out my Patreon page to stay up to date with the latest happenings with the show. Thank you for listening and your support. Stay safe, and I will see you for the next episode. Bye.